Alternate History of the British Empire, Imperial Federation, Part 3, 1930 to 1950. The 1930s were a challenging decade economically, socially, and politically for the Imperial Federation members and the world as a whole. The global stock market crash of 1929 affected the Imperial Federation, but not as severely as the United States, due to the Federation maintaining minimal trade barriers between members. In 1931, the Imperial government introduced a 0.5% income tax empire-wide on the wealthiest citizens. The funds collected were distributed to Dominion and colonial governments to support their populations during the economic hardship and to help pay the Federation's war debts. To address widespread unemployment and stimulate economic growth, the Imperial government initiated infrastructure work programs throughout the empire. One significant project was the Cape Town to Cairo Railway, which employed tens of thousands of people from across the empire. Politically, the 1930s were turbulent as authoritarian politics began to rise in Europe following the Great War. The Russian Empire collapsed into revolution before the war ended in 1918, and by 1923, a communist government had established the Soviet Union, the first communist empire. In other parts of the world, extreme left and right-wing movements competed for power. In 1925, fascists seized control in Italy. In 1933, another extremist party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, gained power in Germany, determined to restore German prestige, even if it meant initiating another major European war. In September 1931, the militaristic government of the Empire of Japan invaded and conquered the Chinese territory of Manchuria. Wanting to avoid conflict, the imperial government and other nations avoid going to war with Japan over China. In 1933, the imperial government granted the new kingdoms of Iraq and Jordan semi-independence, similar to that of Egypt. Although both kingdoms were only granted one seat, each on the Imperial Council, the imperial government retained control over troops in the kingdom and had a say in certain foreign policy decisions. Additionally, the imperial government assisted King Ghazi I, King of Iraq, and Abdullah I, King of Jordan, in developing their political systems into a constitutional monarchy. The territories of Kuwait, Palestine, and other Middle Eastern territories remained under direct imperial control. In 1934, the Second Imperial Exhibition and Games were held in London at the Empire Stadium and Exhibition Ground in Wembley Park. In 1935, the imperial government commenced earnest efforts to transform the Imperial Raj of India into the Dominion of India. Given India's diverse ethnic and religious landscape and vast population, numerous reforms and plans were considered. The Federation's primary objectives for India were to maintain the subcontinent as a largely unified political entity and ensure that its integration into the Federation was smooth and minimally disruptive. On January 20th, 1936, King George V died at the age of 70. His son, Edward VIII, succeeded him as king. However, just 1 month into his reign, Edward VIII sparked a constitutional crisis by expressing his desire to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American woman. This proposal was met with strong opposition from Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin and the Prime Ministers of the Dominions, who believed it would be morally unacceptable to the majority of the British populace. Faced with the threat of Baldwin dissolving the government, which would compromise Edward's role as a politically neutral constitutional monarch, Edward VIII chose to abdicate the throne on December 11, 1936. His reign lasted only 325 days, making it one of the shortest in British history, and he was never coronated. His younger brother, George VI, was made king. George VI and his wife Elizabeth were coronated on May 12, 1937. George VI was crowned King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, the Dominions and Colonies, and Emperor of India, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. In March 1936, Germany defied the Treaty of Versailles by remilitarizing the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone along the French border. That same year, Spain devolved into a civil war between the Communists and the Fascists, which resulted in a fascist victory in 1939. In 1937, the territory of Burma, separated from India, became a separate self-governing colony and was given 3 seats on the Imperial Council. On July 18, 1938, India was given Dominion status, which gave the population self-governing status as a federal parliamentary democracy. This status also granted them 11 extra seats on the Imperial Council, bringing their total to 17. They also gained 34 seats in the Imperial Parliament. On June 27, 1939, the Cape to Cairo Railway was completed. Its length upon completion was 10,489 kilometers or 6,518 miles. It became the longest railway in the world, known as the Trans-African Railway. It connected many of the cities of the Imperial Federation's dominions and colonies in Central and East Africa with the already established railways in the Kingdom of Egypt and South Africa. With the increased aggressiveness of Germany, such as remilitarizing the Rhineland, the annexation of Austria, and the occupation of Czechoslovakia, the British Imperial Federation and the French Empire signed a defense pact with Poland on August 25, 1939, agreeing to come to Poland's aid if it was attacked. On September 1, 1939, Germany invades Poland, prompting the Imperial Federation and France to declare war on Germany, marking the beginning of World War II. Although the Soviet Union also invaded Poland, the Imperial Federation and the French Empire did not declare war on the USSR, believing that Germany and the Soviets would eventually go to war against each other. The Imperial Federation and the French Empire declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, but actual fighting didn't commence until months later as France and the Federation mobilized their forces. During this time, Germany invaded and occupied Denmark and Norway in April 1940 with little resistance. Fighting against Germany began on May 10, 1940, when Germany initiated its invasion of the French lowlands. On the same day, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of the Imperial Federation. The defense of France was a disaster as Allied forces were overrun. The Imperial forces were pushed out of Europe by June 1940, and France surrendered a few weeks later. On June 11, 1940, Italy invaded the Kingdom of Egypt in an attempt to capture the Suez Canal from the Imperial Federation. In July 1940, Germany began air attacks against the British Isles. After sustaining heavy losses, Germany switched to bombing British cities from September 1940 to May 1941, after which the Royal Imperial Air Force gained air superiority over the British Isles for the remainder of the war. On June 22, 1941, Germany invaded the USSR. On December 7, 1941, the Empire of Japan attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. That same day, Japan invaded and occupied the Imperial Federation territories of Hong Kong and Malaya. A few days later, Germany declared war on the United States. A year later, Japan invaded the Imperial Territory of Burma. On May 13, 1943, Axis forces in North Africa surrendered to Imperial and Allied forces. Just over a year later, on June 6, 1944, Imperial and American forces successfully invaded Normandy to liberate German-occupied France and force the unconditional surrender of Germany. Less than a year later, in April 1945, Soviet troops captured Berlin. On May 8, 1945, the war in Europe officially ended. Japan was the last Axis holdout, despite American and Imperial forces surrounding the Japanese home islands. In early 1945, Imperial troops began pushing back the Japanese forces in Burma, with plans to also recapture Malaya in 1945. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On September 2, 1945, the Empire of Japan surrendered, ending World War II. Immediately after the war ended, relations between the Imperial Federation and other Western allies began souring with the USSR. World War II was even deadlier than the Great War, with a combined death toll of around 75 million people. Of the over 11 million troops who served in the armed forces of the Imperial Federation, over 580,000 were killed. On June 8, 1946, the Imperial Federation held a victory parade in the imperial capital of London. Crowds thronged the banks of the Thames and Westminster Bridge to watch Emperor King George VI and his family proceed down the river in the royal barge. The parade included not only the armed forces of the Imperial Federation, but also the armed forces of the other allied nations, except the USSR. With the war over, the imperial government spent much of the rest of the 1940s rebuilding areas in many parts of the empire that had been damaged by the war. On January 4, 1948, Burma was given dominion status and granted 20 seats in the Imperial Parliament. Their seat total on the Imperial Council also increased from 3 to 10. The Imperial colony of Malaya was also negotiating to become a dominion and member of the Imperial Federation in 1948. However, in June of that year, members of the Malayan Communist Party killed 3 British rubber plantation managers. This act resulted in the imperial government instituting a state of emergency in the Malaysian colony and cracking down on the communists, leading to a guerrilla war against the colonial government that lasted nearly a decade. In 1949, the Allied occupation zones in Western Germany, including the Imperial Federation's occupation zone, formed the Federal Republic of Germany. The Soviet-controlled Eastern German territory became the German Democratic Republic. Facing mounting pressure for political and economic reform within the Imperial Federation, particularly concerning seat distribution on the Imperial Council and in the Imperial Parliament, as well as the future of the Imperial Territory of Palestine and other imperial colonies, Prime Minister Winston Churchill called for an imperial conference. This conference was scheduled to coincide with the Imperial Exhibition and Games, which were to take place from April to October 1950 in London. Despite the violent and turbulent first half of the 20th century, the Imperial Federation came out of its first 40 years as one of the world's strongest political, economic, and military powers. Join us for Part 4 to see how the Imperial Federation makes much-needed reforms and deals with the new Cold War with the Soviet Union and its communist proxies. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe.